Hi, welcome to some pincushion ideas with GourmetQuilter. I'm Susan Clare, the GourmetQuilter, and we're doing 20 different pincushions in 20 days, and we're up to pincushion number 17, so we're having a huge amount of fun. Lots of different pincushions going on. There's a pattern on GourmetQuilter.com, then more information there if you're interested to have a look. If you're receiving the pattern, you're going to have a download to print that looks something like this with all the pattern shapes and things. And information on what to do. This time we're doing a chook, or some people might call it a chicken in New Zealand and Australia. Quite often these are referred to as chooks. So this is a very happy little chook, and it's very keen to be looking after your pins and maybe even your clips as well. But in the meantime we need to make it, so we'll have a look at how that's made. So I've gone ahead, I've cut out all my shapes. So I've got some body shapes, I've got a gusset. So a gusset is this bit that comes here that gives us that extra wide. It's a very, very full chicken. It's been eating well. I've got some wings, I've got the little comb and the little wattle, and I've got a beak and I've got a tail. So we've got everything ready to go. So I'm just going to show you how to do things. So the first thing to do is to get all these little extremities ready. So we need to get the wings ready and all these bits. So I've got a lot of it done, because it just seemed like a lot of just straight sewing. So all the shapes, I've turned most of them in the right way, but I haven't done this one yet. But I've done the stitching, so I'm using a thin batting behind everything. So I find that that works really well. So all the pieces have got this thin batting in it. And so I've joined two pieces together. This is his little comb that sits on top of his head. And so what I've done with all of these pieces is done all the stitching, and you can see the stitching line here because it's red and you probably can't see it on that side. And then I'm just going to trim the seam. So as I said, I've done all this already on the other shapes to maybe about 1/8 of an inch of fabric left. You don't want to go down any less than that because it can get a little bit risky as to whether things might pop through, and you don't want that to happen when you're turning it out. So I'm just going to trim that around there. And the other thing to do is, if there's any little tight corners like there is in this one, because we've got this little, missed a bit there, this little scoopy bits here, we need to clip into the corners, but don't cut your stitching, so that when we turn that out, because it's going to go the other way then, it's got somewhere it can go and the fabric will move with it. So then we've got to turn them all in the right way. So this is perhaps just a little bit fiddly because the pieces are small, but if you just use a super fine batting, I think it's nice to have something in the inside there, but you really don't want anything too much, because it does make all this sort of thing much harder if it's all a bit fuller. And I've got my trusty turning pencil here. So then we just need to push those bits out the right way and push all the little shape. I like to run a tool of some sort, and it happens to be my pencil, around seams, particularly if they're curved and things like this, because it just helps get the shape nicely out. So by trimming the seam, that helps, and then running something around the seam, and then I like to just press everything. So that's all ready to press now. So we've got a raw edge because that's all going to be stitched into the seam. So this is his little bit on top of his head here, and it gets stitched in as we make up the body there. So I've got all the pieces done now. Now the wings are going to be sewn on later. So there's a little turning gap there. And again, that's pressed, the edges are pressed in on that so that hopefully it's going to sit nice and smoothly. And we're going to be stitching those on later, and we close the gap of the wing at the same time. So that's quite convenient. The tail is sitting in the back there. So now I've got my body shape here. And so I just need to start positioning things. So there are marks and things on the pattern that will help with all this. So we've got to pop his little wattle in there. Oh, it might be a her. We might have to call her her. Maybe it's Henrietta. I'm not really sure. Then we've got the beak. Now the beak and the wattle are probably just going to overlap just slightly, because they're just at the 1/4 inch mark, so that they come out at about the same point when we do our 1/4 inch seam going past there. So we can pop that there, we can pop the beak so that it just overlaps in the seam allowance, and we can pop this one just on the back of the head there, Now we're just going to have to watch these shapes don't get caught as we're doing the stitching, so I'm actually just going to pop a pin in there just to hold that out of the way, because we don't want it folded where we're going to be sewing, but we do want it held out of the way because we're going to just find that that's inconvenient otherwise. But I think what I'm actually going to do is most likely I'm just going to stitch the pieces in place before we try and do everything else. So really just with a holding stitch, and so not quite on the 1/4 inch but in more like an 1/8 of an inch, just to hold it in place so that when we come to sew it all together things don't move later on. So I'll go ahead and just get those held in place now. Just remember we're turning the corner around the top of the head there, so we don't want to get that in the way there. Right, so they're all held in place now, so they won't get lost or rearranged. And so now we want to start putting the bodies together, but we've got to leave a large portion to put the gusset in. So what I was going to do initially, having this piece out of the way, was to sew up just from the base of the wattle here, up and around, and really just to the corner here, just to include the tail, but not round the corner where the tail is, and no further down than where the wattle is, because that's where the gusset's got to go, in between there. So I'm going to go ahead, but the other thing is we don't want to sew all the way down the back because we're leaving a gap for turning. So we'll just get the rest of this done, and you can see what I'm doing. So now I'm doing my 1/4 inch seam, and it just needs to go from where that wattle starts there. So just when we're doing these really tight curves like around the top here, just every couple of stitches you might need to move it, leaving the needle down if you can. And then we just want to make sure that that's not getting caught in the seam. No, I think it's okay there. And then we're just leaving a gap in this back for turning and filling. And then I'm just going to come down here and stitch in where the tail is as well. So these chooks are kind of fun. They are a little bit fiddly to make, but they're well worth it. They're good little friends. So you can see it's all starting to come together already. And we've got our gap here that we're going to be turning and filling once we've done all the rest of it. So I'm going to turn them back out the wrong way again because we've got to get this gusset in. But it's good just to check that things are sitting in the right place. So now with the gusset, we only want to stitch on each side. So you just want to make sure that little wattle's sitting out of your way. So fold that out the way. And we're just going to start and stop at the 1/4 inch in mark from the top here. So we want to place that right where that seam intersects there. So we're going to start sewing there. So I'll pop a pin in there just to hold it there. And then we're going to bring it around this corner here, and we want it to finish up just short of this corner here. So again, we're going to stop sewing right in that point there, so before we get to the end. So again, I'll pop a pin where I'm going to stop sewing, and then this bit here just needs to be eased in. Now we've done this sort of thing, we've done circles and other shapes and things, so it's the same sort of thing, just easing it around and pinning it in place so that we can stitch it quite comfortably. We'll get one side of this gusset in, and then we have to do the other side. So it's a little bit of fullness going on, and that's so that this can come out nicely and be nicely rounded as well. So probably more pins is better than not enough for this sort of thing, because you don't really want it all moving and carrying on. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch that now. So just from, as I said, from that point where we had stopped sewing on the previous line, and right to this point down here as well. So that's looking pretty good. You can see that when that turns out, that's all going to sit nicely. It's sitting well there, and it will sit well there when we finish off that corner as well. So I'll go ahead and I'll do the other side. So this one has to come down here, and when we get to this end this time, we can continue. Well, no, we'll need to stop, and then we'll finish off that little corner afterwards. So I'll just get the gusset in, and then I'll show you how to do the little fiddly bit at that end there as well. So I've done the other side of the gusset there. Just make sure where it meets up here, where the wattle went in, that there's no gap. I'm going to be using a crushed walnut shell. I don't want anything coming out of there. So just make sure there isn't a gap left there. Otherwise everything's looking pretty good. I've just trimmed the seams just a touch. We've still got this little corner to sort out here because, again, I've sewn the gusset so that there's no gap at the gusset. However, there is a little gap at the back end of this little chicken here. So we just need to now come around that little tiny corner. It's easier just to get the gusset in and then come and fix that little corner than it is to try and have everything exact in the first place. So I'll just do that little bit of a seam just around there, and you can just sort of square it off or round it off a little bit. It doesn't need very much, but it does need to have everything so that it's all enclosed, because we don't want it sending out any of our little walnut shells. So I'll just finish trimming off this little corner here. So that's all looking pretty good. So we can turn them out the right way now and start getting excited about filling it. With this little thin layer of batting, it just helps things sort of sit nicely and softer, particularly with the filling with the walnut shell. Walnut shell is used as an abrasive, so it would eventually wear through if you're not careful, so the batting does help. As apart from it making it soft, it is a little bit of a buffer as well. So things should all now pop out, we hope, just where we want them. And so far it's looking pretty good. I'm just going to run that pencil put out the top of his head's looking pretty good. And along the seams. Oh, we're looking pretty good, I think. It's going to have a nice little fat chest. Chickens have quite a nice little fat chest. So I am just going to press, you can't press a lot of it, but I'm going to press in these little seam allowances where we're going to be hand stitching it closed, where we left the gap in the back there. Just so that it's a bit easier if it's got a line to go to once we've filled it. And the other thing, I'm going to use a little bit of the polyfill, fibre fill, just up in the head area, because the shell's not going to stay up there. So and it's just nice to have a little bit of something up there. So you don't need very much, but just a little bit of the fibre fill up in the head would be helpful, and then we can fill the rest of it up and then sew the eyes on. In fact, you could probably sew the eyes on pretty soon whilst you can kind of get at everything. In fact, I think I'm going to sew the eyes on now before it's harder to manage. So I've got a needle and thread here. I've just got two little tiny buttons here that I'm going to use for eyes. You could use beads. There's lots of things you can use for eyes, but I am using little tiny buttons. And I'm just going to stitch them on and stitch right through to hold that nice and tight in. So we just want to come out the other side as well. So I might go ahead and finish sewing these buttons on, and then we'll get them filled up. So we have eyes, we can see what we're up to. It's always again a good thing. I'm just going to still put just a little bit more in that head. And now I'm going to start putting in some of the crushed walnut shell for the main part of the body here. So chickens can be quite fun to have. We've had chickens live with us at times, and they're interesting little characters. We had about 6 of them clambering all over my push bike one time. That was quite funny. So really the filling just needs to keep going in as much as you can reasonably get it. So I'll continue on filling the chicken and making sure that everywhere's filled out nicely as you go, and squidge it around a bit. And I think just at the at the end, when I've finished putting the shell in, I'm going to put a bit more of the shell in. I'll just finish off that back with just a little bit more of the fibre fill, and then I'm just going to hand sew that closed, and then we've got to pop the wings on. So I'll go ahead and do all that, because you've seen me do the filling before. So I'll put more shell in, a little bit of fibre fill, and I'll hand sew up that little back area there, and then we'll put the wings on. So we've got our little chicken looking, it's not quite finished. I've stitched up the little gap here that we left for turning and filling. Now with the filling, just I've got the polyfill along the back here and up in the head, as I said, and there's just got to be a little bit of room to move for the chicken, because she kind of likes to just settle in. If you've ever watched a hen, they do like to just settle themselves in. So if it's too firm, she can't settle, and she doesn't really like it if she can't settle too well. So I'm just started to sew. I've sewn one of the wings on, and we're just hand sewing them on. So there was the gap for turning on the wing on this sort of front curve edge here. So that can be closed at the same time as we're stitching it on. And so just to line them up and things, if you look at a front on, you should be able to sort of see more or less where they are and things like that, so that they're similar on both sides, although you can really only see it from one side at a time. So I've gone ahead and positioned her, and I'm just in the process of sewing up the gap here and the rest of the wing. It's very nearly finished, this little chicken. So we might as well finish it off so that we can see the pair of them together, because they're very, very helpful, these little chickens. They absolutely love having pins stuck in them. We had a good little chat about that, and they said that not only can they keep pins, but they can actually keep your clips as well. Those of you who know about chickens will know that there has been a practice of clipping chickens' wings. So these chickens here said that they're quite happy to have their wings clipped, but perhaps not in the traditional sense. More in the adding clips to the wings rather than clipping the actual wings. So I'm nearly done. I'm just going to finish it off here. So all I'm stitching is just the top of the wing and around the front there, so that the rest is just flapping like that. So I've just got another stitch to do here, and I can tie it off, and I can show you her finish. So to tie off, I'm just doing just an extra little stitch in the same place as I've just done, and then I do yet another one, just a tiny stitch really, and then with the loop of my thread there, I just put the needle, I wrap it around the needle twice. This is what I do. I have no idea whether everyone else in the world does this. And then I just pull that up nice and tight. It forms a knot there, and then I can pop the needle inside and it can come out somewhere else, and then I can trim my thread off, and those threads just sit inside then, and they're not any trouble to anybody. And here she is sitting quite happily. They're very happy to chat to each other. So the idea is that you can of course stick pins in them anywhere you like. As I said, they're very happy about it. Plus the wings can take the clips, the tail can take the clips. We can even really get carried away if they just get too noisy. You know what I'm going to do, don't you? We can even put clips on here. So, poor chickens. They said they weren't too sure about that bit. But there's our little chicken pin cushion. This was pin cushion number 17 in our series of 20, so we're getting close to the end. So we can keep pins, we can keep clips, and have a lot of fun with that chicken. And I will see you again with pin cushion number 18.